The concert hall in Vienna was filled with the most important people in classical music. There were famous composers, music teachers from the best schools in Europe, and judges who had spent their whole lives studying piano. They had all come to witness something special. A Chinese composer named Liu Wei had created what he called the most difficult piano piece ever written. He named it the Impossible Sonata, and he was not joking about the name. Liu Wei stood on the stage with a proud smile on his face. He was 63 years old and had spent the last 12 years of his life creating this single piece of music. Behind him, a large screen showed the sheet music. The audience gasped when they saw it. The pages were filled with notes so close together that they looked like black clouds. There were sections where both hands had to play different rhythms at the same time. There were jumps across the keyboard that seemed physically impossible. Some parts required the pianist to press keys so quickly that human fingers would need to move faster than anyone had ever moved before. The head judge, a German woman named Helga Braun, studied the sheet music with growing concern. She had been judging piano competitions for over 40 years. She had seen child prodigies and legendary masters perform pieces that made audiences cry with joy. But this was different. This was not music meant to be beautiful. This was a puzzle meant to defeat anyone who tried to solve it. Liu Wei explained his creation to the silent audience. He told them that he had used computer programs to find the absolute limits of what a piano could do. He had studied the fastest pianists in history and made his piece just slightly faster than any of them could play. He had added chord combinations that required hands larger than any human possessed. He had included sections where the timing changed every few seconds, making it almost impossible to keep track of the rhythm. The judges looked at each other with worry in their eyes. They had invited the best pianists in the world to attempt this piece. Famous performers from Russia, America, Japan, and France had all agreed to come. Each one of them was a legend in their own country. Each one of them had won dozens of competitions and performed in the greatest concert halls on earth. Surely one of them could play this impossible piece. The first pianist to try was a Russian man named Viktor Petrov. He was 51 years old and had been playing piano since he was 3. His fingers were long and thin, perfect for reaching difficult keys. He had practiced for 6 months just for this moment. He sat down at the piano with confidence in his eyes. The audience held their breath as he placed his fingers on the keys. Victor began to play. For the first 30 seconds, everything seemed fine. His fingers moved like lightning across the keyboard. The notes rang out clear and strong. But then the piece became harder. The rhythm changed suddenly, and Victor's left hand fell behind. He tried to catch up, but the notes were coming too fast. His face turned red with effort. Sweat appeared on his forehead. At the 2-minute mark, he made his first mistake. A wrong note echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Then another mistake came, and another. By the 3-minute mark, Victor stopped playing completely. He stared at his hands as if they had betrayed him. Then he stood up, bowed sadly to the audience, and walked off the stage without saying a word. The American pianist tried next. Her name was Sarah Chun, and she was known for her incredible speed. She had once played a piece so fast that the judges had to watch the video in slow motion to count all her notes. But even she could not defeat the Impossible Sonata. She lasted 4 minutes before the complexity became too much. Her fingers started pressing wrong keys, and she finally stopped with tears in her eyes. One by one, the greatest pianists in the world sat down at that piano. One by one, they failed. The Japanese master lasted 3.5 minutes. The French virtuoso made it to 5 minutes before giving up. A young prodigy from South Korea, only 19 years old and already famous worldwide, tried twice but could not get past the 6-minute mark. Each failure made Liu Wei smile a little wider. He had created something truly impossible, and he was proud of it. By the end of the first day, 12 pianists had tried and 12 had failed. The judges were exhausted from watching so many talented musicians struggle. Helga Braun rubbed her tired eyes and wondered if this whole event had been a mistake. Perhaps some pieces were simply not meant to be played by human hands. That night, while the adults rested and worried about the next day, A small girl sat in her hotel room in Vienna. Her name was Mei Lin, and she was only 8 years old. She had come to Vienna with her grandmother, who worked as a cleaner at the concert hall. Mei Lin had watched all 12 pianists fail from a small corner backstage where her grandmother hid in her. And as she watched, something strange happened in her mind. She began to see the music differently than everyone else saw it. Mei Lin had never been to a music school. She had never had a single piano lesson from a professional teacher. Her family was poor, living in a small apartment in the outskirts of Shanghai. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to pay for food and rent. Her father had left when she was 3 years old, and no one knew where he had gone. There was no money for piano lessons, no money for music books, and certainly no money for a real piano. But Mei Lin had something that money could not buy. She had a gift that appeared when she was only 4 years old. Her grandmother had taken her to a shopping mall, and there was a piano sitting in the corner for customers to play. A young man was playing a simple song, and little Mei Lin watched with wide eyes. When the man finished and walked away, Mei Lin climbed onto the piano bench. Her grandmother tried to pull her away, worried that she would embarrass them. But before she could, Mei Lin placed her tiny fingers on the keys and played the exact same song the man had just played. Every note was perfect. Every rhythm was correct. She had heard it once and could play it immediately. Her grandmother nearly fainted from shock. She grabbed Mei Lin and hurried out of the mall, afraid that people would think they had stolen something. But that night, she told Mei Lin's mother what had happened. At first, her mother did not believe it. How could a 4-year-old who had never touched a piano play a song perfectly after hearing it just once? It seemed impossible to test her daughter. Mei Lin's mother hummed a children's song. She took Mei Lin to a neighbor's house, where there was an old keyboard, dusty and missing a few keys. Mei Lin sat down and played the song her mother had hummed. Then the neighbor played a different song, something more complicated with faster notes. Mei Lin listened once and played it back without a single error. The neighbor played another song, and another, each one more difficult than the last. Mei Lin played them all perfectly. Word spread quickly through their small community. People came from other neighborhoods to see the little girl who could play any song after hearing it just once. Some called her a genius. Others called her a miracle. A few whispered that she must have some kind of magic inside her. But Mei Lin did not care what people called her. She only knew that when she heard music, something special happened in her brain. The notes appeared in her mind like colors, each one a different shade. She could see the music as clearly as other people could see a painting. And once she saw it, she could never forget it. A kind neighbor let Mei Lin practice on their old keyboard whenever she wanted. She spent hours there every day, playing songs she had heard on the radio, on television, or from the street musicians who sometimes performed near her home. By the time she was 6, she could play complicated classical pieces that usually took students years to learn. By 7, she was playing music that professional pianists struggled with. But there was a problem. Without proper training, Mei Lin could only play music she had heard before. She did not know how to read sheet music. The black dots and lines on paper meant nothing to her. She could listen to a symphony orchestra and play back every part from memory, but she could not look at written notes and understand what they meant. Her grandmother worried about this. She knew that Mei Lin had an incredible gift, but without the ability to read music, how could she ever become a real musician? Then something wonderful happened. A retired music teacher moved into the apartment next door. Her name was Mrs. Zhou, and she was 74 years old. She had taught piano at a university for 40 years before retiring. When she heard Mei Lin playing on the neighbor's keyboard, she came to investigate. She watched the little girl with amazement in her eyes. She had taught thousands of students in her career, but she had never seen anyone with such natural talent that Mrs. Zhou offered to teach Mei Lin for free. She said it would be a crime to let such a gift go to waste. For 2 years, she taught Mei Lin everything she knew. She taught her how to read sheet music, how to understand musical theory, and how to control her incredible abilities. It was not easy. Mei Lin's brain worked differently than other students. She could not learn music the normal way. But Mrs. Zhou was patient and creative. She found new methods to teach her special student, and slowly, Mei Lin began to understand the language of written music. By the time Mei Lin turned 8, she could do something no one else on earth could do. She could look at any piece of sheet music, no matter how complicated, and understand it immediately. The notes would transform into colors in her mind, and she could see exactly how to play them. More importantly, she could see things in the music that others missed. She could find shortcuts and patterns that made difficult pieces easier. She could solve musical puzzles that had confused experts for centuries. When Mrs. Zhou saw the news about the Impossible Sonata and the challenge in Vienna, she knew immediately what she had to do. She had a little money saved from her retirement, just enough for 2 plane tickets. She called Mei Lin's grandmother, who had once been her student many years ago, and told her about the opportunity. Mei Lin's grandmother was hesitant. The competition seemed too important, too serious for a child. But Mrs. Zhou convinced her that this was Mei Lin's chance to show the world what she could do. They arrived in Vienna 3 days before the competition began. Mrs. Zhou had connections in the music world, old friends who helped them find a place to stay. Mei Lin's grandmother got a temporary job cleaning the concert hall, which allowed Mei Lin to watch the competition from backstage. And as she watched the greatest pianists in the world fail, one by one, Mei Lin studied the music on the big screen. She saw the colors forming in her mind. She saw the patterns that everyone else was missing. And she began to understand that the Impossible Sonata was not actually impossible at all. The second day of the competition was even worse than the first. More pianists came, more pianists failed. A legendary performer from Italy, a man who had won every major competition in Europe, lasted only 2 minutes before his hands cramped from the impossible speed. A young woman from Brazil, considered the future of classical piano, broke down crying after her 3rd attempt. Even a computer scientist who had trained using special algorithms and artificial intelligence could not get past the halfway point of the piece. Liu Wei was having the time of his life. He sat in the front row, watching each failure with satisfaction. Reporters interviewed him between attempts, and he spoke proudly about his creation. He said that this piece would stand forever as proof that some things were simply beyond human ability. He said that future generations would study the Impossible Sonata and understand that music had limits that could never be broken. Some of the judges were starting to agree with him. Helga Braun called a meeting with the other judges during the lunch break. They gathered in a small room behind the stage, their faces tired and worried. One of the judges, an old man from England, suggested that they should end the competition early. He said there was no point in watching more talented musicians humiliate themselves. Another judge, a woman from Japan, agreed. She said that Liu Wei had won, and they should simply admit defeat. But Helga was not ready to give up. She had spent her whole life believing in the power of human creativity. She had seen musicians do things that seemed impossible. She remembered a blind pianist who had learned to play by feeling the vibrations in the air. She remembered a woman with only 3 fingers on each hand who had won a national competition through sheer determination. Surely, there had to be someone who could play this piece. While the judges argued, Mei Lin sat backstage with her grandmother. She had been watching the sheet music all morning, her eyes moving across the notes as if she was reading a story. Her grandmother was worried about her. The little girl had not eaten breakfast, had not played with any toys, had not done anything except stare at that screen. But Mei Lin was not bored or tired. She was working. Inside her mind, something extraordinary was happening. The notes of the Impossible Sonata were transforming into colors, just like all music did for her. But this music was different. It was like a puzzle with 1,000 pieces, all mixed up and scattered. Most people looked at those pieces and saw chaos. They tried to put the puzzle together the way the composer intended, following his impossible instructions exactly. But Mei Lin saw something different. She saw that the pieces could fit together in another way. She saw shortcuts that Liu Wei had accidentally created. She saw patterns hidden inside the chaos. Liu Wei had made a mistake when he composed his piece. He was so focused on making it difficult that he did not notice the secret pathways he had built into the music. There were moments where two hands could become one, playing the same notes in a simpler way. There were sections where the timing could be slightly adjusted without changing the sound, making the rhythm easier to follow. There were chords that could be broken apart and played in a different order, reducing the impossible stretches to something human hands could actually do. May Lin did not know she was discovering something revolutionary. She did not understand that music professors would study her techniques for decades to come. She simply saw the colors rearranging themselves in her mind, forming a new picture that made sense. By the time the lunch break ended, she had solved the puzzle. She knew exactly how to play the impossible sonata. She tugged on her grandmother's sleeve and whispered that she wanted to try. Her grandmother looked at her with surprise and concern. Try what? The competition? That was impossible. Mei Lin was just a child, not even a registered competitor. She had no formal training, no reputation, no invitation. The judges would never allow it, but Mei Lin was insistent. She said she could play the piece. She said she had figured it out. Her grandmother did not know what to do. She looked around for Mrs. Zhou, but the old teacher had gone to find food. She was alone with her granddaughter, who was asking to do something crazy. At that moment, something unexpected happened. One of the stagehands, a young man who had been watching Mei Lin stare at the screen all morning, walked over to them. He had seen the look in the little girl's eyes, the same look he had seen in great artists, just before they created something special. He asked if the girl wanted to play. When Mei Lin nodded, he smiled and said he would try to help. The stagehand's name was Thomas, and his uncle was one of the judges. He led Mei Lin and her grandmother through a back door, down a long hallway, into a private waiting room where the judges were still arguing. When he knocked and entered, the judges stopped talking and stared at the small girl standing before them. Helga Braun was the first to speak. She asked who this child was and what she was doing here. The stagehand explained that the girl wanted to attempt the piece. The judges looked at each other with confusion. A child attempting the impossible sonata? It was absurd. It was laughable. It was perhaps the strangest thing they had ever heard. The English judge was about to refuse when Mei Lin stepped forward. She looked up at Helga with calm, steady eyes that seemed much older than her 8 years. She said one simple sentence that changed everything. She said, "I can see what the others cannot see." There was something in her voice that made Helga pause. It was not the words themselves, but the absolute certainty behind them. This was not a child bragging or showing off. This was a child stating a fact, as simply as saying the sky was blue. Helga had been judging musicians for 4 decades, and she had learned to trust her instincts. Her instincts were telling her to give this girl a chance. After a long moment of silence, Helga made a decision that would go down in music history. She said that the girl could try. The other judges protested, saying it was unprofessional, saying it made a joke of the whole competition. But Helga was the head judge, and her word was final. She led Mei Lin out of the room and toward the stage, not knowing that she was about to witness something the world would never forget. The audience did not know what to think when they saw the small girl walk onto the stage. She was so tiny that she could barely see over the piano. Her clothes were simple and worn, nothing like the elegant suits and dresses the other pianists had worn. Her hair was tied in 2 plain braids that hung over her shoulders. She looked like she belonged in a schoolyard, not on the stage of one of the world's most famous concert halls. Liu Wei stood up from his seat in anger. He demanded to know what was happening. He said this was an insult to his masterpiece, letting a random child attempt what the greatest pianists alive had failed to do. Some members of the audience agreed with him. They whispered to each other, asking if this was some kind of joke. A few even started to leave, thinking the competition had become a circus. But Helga raised her hand for silence. She spoke into the microphone and asked for patience. She said that music has always surprised us, that genius has no age, and that everyone deserves a chance to be heard. Her words calmed the crowd, but doubt remained in their eyes. They stayed in their seats, but most expected to see another failure, another embarrassment to add to the list. Mei Lin did not notice the whispers or the stares. She climbed onto the piano bench, and a stagehand quickly brought a cushion so she could reach the keys properly. She placed her small hands on the smooth surface of the piano and closed her eyes. In her mind, she could see the music waiting for her. The colors were bright and beautiful, arranged in the new pattern she had discovered. She took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes rang out across the hall, and immediately something felt different. The other pianists had attacked the music with force, trying to overpower its difficulty with speed and strength. But Mei Lin played gently, almost softly. Her fingers seemed to dance across the keys rather than pound them. The audience leaned forward in their seats, curious about this strange approach. Liu Wei watched with narrow eyes, waiting for the girl to fail. The first minute passed, and she was still playing without mistakes. The second minute passed, and her fingers moved through sections that had defeated professional pianists. His confident smile began to fade. By the third minute, he was gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The judges could not believe what they were seeing. Mei Lin was not playing the piece the way it was written. She was playing something different, something simpler, and yet somehow the music sounded exactly the same. She had found a way to create the same sounds with fewer movements, the same melodies with easier fingering. It was like watching someone solve a mathematical equation using a shortcut that no one else had ever discovered. Helga leaned over to the judge beside her and whispered that this was impossible. The other judge nodded in amazement. They had studied the sheet music for months. They knew every note, every chord, every impossible requirement. And yet this child was making it look easy, as if she was playing a simple nursery rhyme instead of the hardest piece ever composed. 4 minutes passed, then 5. Mei Lin's eyes remained closed, her face peaceful and calm. The audience had stopped whispering. They sat in complete silence, afraid that even breathing too loudly might break whatever spell was happening. Some of them had tears forming in their eyes, though they could not explain why. The music was touching something deep inside them, something they had forgotten existed. Liu Wei finally could not contain himself. He jumped to his feet and shouted that this was cheating. He said the girl was not playing his piece correctly. He demanded that the judges stop her and declare her attempt invalid. But when he looked at the screen showing the sheet music, he fell silent. Mei Lin was hitting every single note exactly as written. The sound coming from the piano matched his composition perfectly. She was simply achieving the same result through a completely different method. The 6-minute mark arrived, the furthest any pianist had reached. Mei Lin continued without hesitation. 7 minutes passed, then 8. She was now in territory no one had ever explored, playing music that had never been heard by human ears. The audience began to realize they were witnessing history. Camera phones appeared throughout the crowd, filming the incredible performance. Despite the rules against recording. At the 9-minute mark, something even more remarkable happened. Mei Lin opened her eyes for the first time since she had started playing. She looked directly at Liu Wei, who was still standing in shock near his seat. There was no pride in her eyes, no triumph, no mockery. There was only a gentle sadness, as if she felt sorry for him, as if she understood that she was destroying something he had spent 12 years creating. The final section of the piece was the hardest of all. Liu Wei had designed it as the ultimate test, a series of impossible chords that required superhuman handspans and inhuman speed. No human should have been able to play it. But Mei Lin's hands moved in ways that defied logic. She broke the chords into patterns, played notes in sequences that achieved the same sound with smaller movements, found rhythms within the chaos that made the impossible possible. And then, suddenly, it was over. The last note rang out across the concert hall, hanging in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Mei Lin lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. She had played the entire piece, all 11 minutes and 32 seconds of it, without a single mistake. For a long moment, there was complete silence. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if time itself had stopped to acknowledge what had just happened. Then, from somewhere in the back of the hall, someone began to clap. Another person joined, then another, until the entire audience was on their feet, applauding and cheering with tears streaming down their faces. The standing ovation lasted for 12 minutes. People were crying openly now, not just audience members, but famous pianists, hardened critics, and even some of the judges. They clapped until their hands hurt, then continued clapping anyway. They had come to witness failure, to watch the greatest musicians in the world be humbled by an impossible piece. Instead, they had witnessed a miracle performed by an 8-year-old girl in warm clothes. May Lin sat on the piano bench through it all, her feet dangling above the floor because she was too small to reach the pedals. She did not smile or wave or take dramatic bows like the professional pianists did. She simply sat there with her hands folded, looking slightly confused by all the attention. Her grandmother rushed onto the stage and wrapped her arms around her. Sobbing into her hair, Mrs. Joe appeared moments later, her old face wet with tears of joy and pride. Helga Braun approached the piano with trembling legs. She had been judging competitions for 40 years, and she thought she had seen everything. She thought nothing could surprise her anymore. But this child had proven her wrong in the most beautiful way possible. She knelt down so she could look into Mei Lin's eyes and asked her a simple question. She asked how she had done it. Mei Lin thought about the question for a moment, then gave an answer that would be quoted in music textbooks for generations to come. She said that the music showed her a door. Everyone else was trying to break through the wall, but she just walked through the door. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like anyone could have seen what she saw if they had just looked in the right way. Liu Wei pushed through the crowd around the stage. His face was red with anger and confusion. He had spent 12 years creating a piece that could not be played, and this child had destroyed his life's work in 11 minutes. He demanded an explanation. He demanded to know how she had changed his music without permission. He threatened to sue, to have her banned, to do anything he could to take back what had just happened. But before anyone could respond to his angry words, the video of Mei Lin's performance appeared on the internet. Someone in the audience had uploaded it, and within minutes, it was being shared across the world. Within hours, millions of people had watched the tiny girl defeat the impossible sonata. Within days, she was the most famous child on the planet. Music experts analyzed her performance frame by frame. They slowed down the video to study her finger movements. They discovered that she had invented entirely new techniques on the spot, ways of playing that no one had ever thought of before. She had found mathematical shortcuts in the music, patterns that reduced impossible movements to simple ones. A professor from MIT said it was like watching someone solve a 1,000 piece puzzle by realizing that most of the pieces were actually the same piece, seen from different angles. The story of Mei Lin's background made her even more beloved. News reporters tracked down her tiny apartment in Shanghai. They interviewed her exhausted mother, who could not stop crying as she watched videos of her daughter. They found the neighbor with the old keyboard where Mei Lin had practiced. They spoke to Mrs. Zhou, who said she always knew Mei Lin was special, but never imagined how special. Offers began pouring in from around the world. Famous music schools offered full scholarships. Concert halls begged her to perform. Recording companies promised millions of dollars for exclusive contracts. Talk show hosts flew to Vienna just to interview her. Presidents and prime ministers sent personal congratulations. A famous American singer said Mei Lin had restored her faith in humanity. An astronaut on the International Space Station watched the video and said it brought tears to his eyes even in zero gravity. But the most important response came from the other pianists who had failed the challenge. One by one, they approached Mei Lin backstage after the judges finished their deliberations. Viktor Petrov, the Russian master who had been first to fail, knelt before her and kissed her hand like she was royalty. He said she had taught him more in 11 minutes than he had learned in 50 years of study. Sarah Chun, the American speed champion, asked if she could study with Mei Lin, making the adults in the room laugh at the idea of a famous pianist asking to be taught by a child. The Japanese master brought her a gift, a beautiful fountain pen made of gold that had belonged to his great-grandfather, also a famous pianist. The French virtuoso recited a poem in her honor that he had composed during her performance. The young prodigy from South Korea simply hugged her and cried, saying she had shown him that true music came from the heart, not from technical perfection. Even Liu Wei eventually came around. It took him 3 days of brooding in his hotel room, watching the video over and over, trying to understand what had happened to his masterpiece. Finally, he requested a private meeting with Mei Lin. When they sat face to face in a quiet room away from the cameras, he asked her the same question Helga had asked. How had she seen what no one else could see? Mei Lin explained it the best way she could. She said that he had been so busy building walls that he did not notice he was also building doors. She said the music told her its secrets because she listened without fear. She said she was not trying to defeat the piece, only trying to understand it. And when she understood it, playing it became as natural as breathing. Liu Wei was quiet for a long time after she finished speaking. Then, for the first time since the competition began, he smiled. He said she was right. He said he had spent so many years trying to create something impossible that he forgot why music existed in the first place. Music existed to be played, to be heard, to bring joy to people's hearts. His impossible sonata had brought frustration and defeat. Her interpretation had brought wonder and tears. He asked if she would allow him to officially revise his composition based on her techniques. He wanted to publish a new version that included her methods, giving credit to the 8-year-old genius who had shown him the error of his ways. Mei Lin agreed without hesitation. She said the music belonged to everyone, not just to her or to him. The months following Vienna changed Mei Lin's life completely. Her family moved from their tiny apartment to a comfortable house near one of the best music schools in Shanghai. Her mother finally quit her second job and could spend evenings at home instead of working until midnight. New furniture filled the rooms. Good food filled the refrigerator. And for the first time in her life, Mei Lin had her own piano, a beautiful instrument that gleamed under the lights of her very own music room. But the greatest change was not the money or the fame. The greatest change was in how people saw what was possible. Before Mei Lin, the world believed that some things simply could not be done. After Mei Lin, the world began to wonder what else might be possible if only someone looked at old problems in new ways. Music teachers around the globe started teaching her techniques, calling them the Mei Lin methods. University professors wrote papers about her unique way of processing musical information. Brain scientists wanted to study how her mind worked. Though her mother politely refused to let them scan her daughter's brain, the video of her performance became the most watched classical music video in history. It passed 100 million views within a month, then 500 million, then 1 billion. People who had never listened to classical music in their lives found themselves watching an 8-year-old girl play piano, and somehow they understood that they were witnessing something important. Comments poured in from every country on earth, written in dozens of languages, all expressing the same amazement and joy that Mei Lin handled the fame with surprising grace for someone so young. She did not become arrogant or demanding like some child stars did. She continued to practice every day, just as she had when she was using the neighbor's old keyboard. She continued to listen to Mrs. Zhou's advice, even though the retired teacher was now famous herself for having trained such an incredible student. She continued to spend time with her grandmother, who still insisted on cooking all of Mei Lin's meals despite having servants available. The revised version of The Impossible Sonata was published 6 months after Vienna. Liu Wei kept his promise and gave full credit to Mei Lin for the new techniques. The sheet music included detailed explanations of her methods, with diagrams showing exactly how she had transformed impossible passages into playable ones. Professional pianists bought copies immediately, eager to learn the secrets that had eluded them for so long. Within a year, over 200 pianists had successfully played the complete piece using Mei Lin's methods. Some of them were professionals who had failed in Vienna and wanted to redeem themselves. Others were students at music conservatories who had once believed the piece was beyond their abilities. A few were talented children, inspired by Mei Lin's example to push themselves beyond what they thought they could do. Helga Brown organized a special concert to celebrate the one-year anniversary of Mei Lin's historic performance. It was held in the same Vienna concert hall, with many of the same judges and audience members in attendance. But this time, instead of watching pianists fail, they watched a parade of musicians successfully perform Liu Wei's composition. Some used Mei Lin's methods exactly. Others added their own interpretations, finding new doors in the music that even Mei Lin had not discovered. The highlight of the evening was a duet, performance by Mei Lin and Liu Wei himself. The composer had spent the past year learning to play his own piece, something he had never been able to do when he wrote it. He sat beside the little girl at a specially built double piano, and together they played a version arranged for 4 hands. The audience watched in amazement as the man who had created an impossible challenge played alongside the child who had made it possible. The sound they created together was more beautiful than anything either could produce alone. After the concert, reporters asked Mei Lin what she wanted to do next. Did she want to become a professional pianist? Did she want to travel the world performing in concert halls? Did she want to go to the best music conservatory and study under famous teachers? Her answer surprised everyone. She said she wanted to teach other children. She said there were millions of kids around the world like her, kids with incredible gifts, but no opportunity to develop them. She said she had been lucky to meet Mrs. Zhou and have a grandmother who believed in her. But most talented children never got such chances. They grew up never knowing what they could become. The announcement sparked a new round of media attention. Donations began arriving from around the world, from wealthy music lovers who wanted to support her vision. A famous technology billionaire offered to fund an entire network of music schools in poor communities. Government officials in several countries proposed programs to identify and nurture musical talent in disadvantaged children. Mei Lin's simple wish had started a global movement. Over the next few years, the Mei Lin Foundation grew into one of the largest music education organizations on earth. It opened free music schools in 37 countries, providing instruments, teachers, and opportunities to children who could never afford them otherwise. Thousands of young musicians received training that their families could not have paid for. Some of them became professional performers. Others became music teachers themselves, continuing the cycle of giving that Mei Lin had started. Foundation's most successful program was called See the Door, named after Mei Lin's famous explanation of how she had solved the impossible sonata. It taught children to approach music not as a series of rules to follow, but as a puzzle to solve. It encouraged creativity and experimentation, letting students find their own paths through difficult pieces. Teachers reported that students in the program learned faster and retained more than students taught through traditional methods. 10 years after the competition in Vienna, Mei Lin stood on a stage in the same concert hall where she had changed the world. She was 18 now, no longer the tiny girl in worn clothes, but a young woman of quiet elegance and remarkable poise. The concert hall was filled with people who had come from every corner of the globe to celebrate the anniversary of that historic day. Liu Wei was there, now in his 70s, but still composing music. Mrs. Zhou was there, approaching 90, but refusing to miss this moment. Helga Braun was there, retired from judging, but still deeply connected to the music world. And in the front row sat Mei Lin's mother and grandmother, their eyes already wet with tears before the music had even begun. A concert that evening was unlike any other. Mei Lin had spent 2 years preparing a new composition of her own, her first major original work. She called it The Open Door, a piece inspired by everything she had learned since that day when she was 8 years old. It was not designed to be impossible. It was designed to be beautiful. It was designed to show that music was not about defeating challenges, but about touching hearts. As she sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys, memories flooded through her mind. She remembered the old keyboard at the neighbor's house, missing keys, but full of possibilities. She remembered Mrs. Zhou's patient lessons, her grandmother's proud smile, her mother sacrificed hours working extra jobs. She remembered the looks on the judges' faces when she first walked onto this stage, their doubt transforming into wonder. She remembered Liu Wei's anger turning into respect, and then into friendship. She began to play. The music that filled the hall was nothing like the impossible sonata that had made her famous. It was gentle and warm, like sunlight through a window. It was joyful and sad at the same time, like a smile through tears. It was complex in its simplicity, difficult in its ease, a paradox that only true masters could create. The audience listened in rapt silence, not because they were waiting for something spectacular, but because they were already experiencing something sacred. The piece told the story of her life without using any words. There were passages that sounded like a child discovering music for the first time, innocent notes stumbling into beauty. There were sections that captured the struggle of poverty, the determination to succeed against all odds. There were moments of triumph that made the heart soar and moments of quiet reflection that brought peace to the soul. And woven through it all was a theme of gratitude, of acknowledging every person who had helped her along the way. When the final notes faded into silence, no one applauded immediately. The audience sat motionless, processing what they had just experienced. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others had their eyes closed, not wanting to let go of the emotions the music had stirred. Even the professional musicians in attendance, people who had heard thousands of performances, seemed moved in ways they could not express. Then Lu Wei stood up from his seat in the front row. He was old now, his movements slow and careful, but his face was radiant with joy as he began to clap. One by one, others joined him until the entire hall was filled with thunderous applause. The ovation lasted longer than the one 10 years ago, not because the performance was more technically impressive, but because it was more meaningful. In the years that followed, Mei Lin continued to compose and perform. She never became the flashy celebrity that some had expected. She preferred small concerts in community centers to grand performances in famous halls. She spent more time teaching than performing, more time listening to young students than accepting awards from prestigious organizations. The music world had offered her unlimited fame and fortune, but she had chosen a different path. Her foundation continued to grow and thrive. By the time she turned 30, over 100,000 children had received free music education through programs she had created. Some of those children had become famous musicians themselves. Others had become teachers, doctors, engineers, and artists, carrying the discipline and creativity that music had taught them into every field of human endeavor. The ripple effects of that one performance in Vienna had spread farther than anyone could have imagined. Mrs. Zhou passed away peacefully at the age of 94, surrounded by family and former students. In her final days, she told Mei Lin that she was her greatest achievement, not because of the fame or the records, but because of the kind of person she had become. She said that talent was common, but character was rare, and Mei Lin had both in abundance. The word stayed with Mei Lin forever, a reminder of what truly mattered in life. On the 20th anniversary of the Vienna performance, a documentary was released about Mei Lin's journey. It included interviews with everyone who had witnessed that historic day, from the judges to the cleaners, from the failed pianists to the audience members who had been moved to tears. The documentary ended with footage of Mei Lin visiting a small music school in rural China, sitting at an old piano with a group of children gathered around her. She was teaching them the same thing she had shown the world 2 decades earlier. She was teaching them to see the door. The final scene showed her demonstrating a difficult passage to a shy little girl who reminded everyone of Mei Lin herself at that age. The girl tried and failed again. Mei Lin did not criticize or correct. She simply played the passage again, more slowly this time, letting the girl watch and listen. On her 3rd attempt, the girl played it perfectly. Her face lit up with surprise and joy, and Mei Lin smiled, remembering the moment when she had first discovered that impossible things were just things waiting to be understood. As the camera pulled back, the sound of children playing piano filled the air. Some were out of tune, some were off rhythm, but all of them were trying, all of them were learning, all of them were discovering their own doors. And somewhere in that beautiful chaos was the legacy of an 8-year-old girl who had once dared to see what everyone else had given up trying to find. The music played on, as it always would, as long as there were people willing to listen with open hearts and see with unclouded eyes.